The billionaire CEO's ex-wife shows up to his engagement party with a Rolls Royce and triplets he never knew existed. The champagne glass slipped from Damien Rousseau's fingers, and the sound of crystal shattering against marble echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. 500 of Manhattan's elite stood frozen, their eyes moving between the billionaire CEO on the platform and the woman standing in the doorway with 3 children who had his face. Damien, Genevieve hissed beside him, her manicured nails digging into his arm. What is happening? Who are these children? But he couldn't answer, couldn't breathe, couldn't process anything beyond the impossible sight before him. Vivian Monroe moved through the parted crowd with the 3 children, her midnight silk gown flowing like liquid shadow. When she reached the base of the platform where he stood with his fiancée, she looked up at him with those storm-gray eyes he'd spent 6 years trying to forget. "Hello, Damien," she said softly. "Thank you for the invitation. We need to talk." "You," he stammered, his legendary composure evaporating. "Vivian, who are they?" The little boy tugged at Vivian's gown. Man, is that him? Is that our father?" "Father." The word detonated in Damien's chest like a bomb. One of the girls studied him with eyes the exact shade of amber as his own. "He's taller than in the pictures," she observed. "And he looks confused," the other girl added. Man, does he not know about us?" Every camera in the room was pointed at them now. Every phone was recording. Damien could feel his carefully constructed world crumbling with each passing second. "Damien," Genevieve's voice was shrill now. "Answer me. Who are these children?" He looked at his fiancée, this woman he'd proposed to 6 weeks ago because she was suitable, convenient, appropriate. A strategic alliance dressed up as romance. Then he looked back at Vivian and the 3 miniature versions of himself staring up at him with curiosity and something that looked like hope. "I don't know," he heard himself say, the words hollow. "I don't." "Vivian?" Vivian's expression remained perfectly composed. "They're yours," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "All 3 of them. And yes, before you ask, you never knew. I never told you." The ballroom erupted into chaos, but Damien barely heard it. He was too busy staring at 3 children who had his jawline, his eyes, his smile. 3 children he'd never known existed until this very moment. Have you ever had your entire world shatter in a single instant? Have you ever realized that while you were building an empire, you were missing everything that actually mattered? Damien Rousseau was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. That some mistakes can't be fixed with money. That some absences leave scars that take more than wealth to heal. And that the woman he'd abandoned 6 years ago had become more powerful than he'd ever imagined, while raising 3 children he never knew were his. This is a story about second chances, redemption, and whether love can survive betrayal. If you've ever wondered if people can truly change, or if some mistakes are too big to fix, stay with me. Please don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, just 3 hours before Damien's world imploded. The Grand Meridian Ballroom glittered like something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic light across marble floors so polished they reflected the faces of 500 guests like mirrors. The elite of Manhattan society had gathered in their finest, designer gowns and custom tuxedos worth more than most people's yearly salaries. Champagne flowed from fountains. A string quartet played softly in the corner. White roses, thousands of them, adorned every surface, their perfume heavy in the air. Damien Rousseau stood on the raised marble platform at the front of the ballroom, his hand resting on the waist of his fiancée, Genevieve Laurent. She was objectively perfect. A former supermodel turned socialite, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, her red gown hugging curves that had graced magazine covers worldwide. She smiled for the cameras with practiced precision, every angle calculated, every pose perfected through years of professional training. "To new beginnings," Damien announced, raising his crystal champagne flute. His voice carried across the ballroom with the smooth confidence of a man who had never been denied anything. At 38, He commanded the Russo Collection, a global luxury hospitality empire worth $18 billion. 67 hotels across 5 continents. From Dubai to Tokyo, from Paris to New York, the Russo name was synonymous with elegance, exclusivity, and uncompromising luxury. It was his grandfather's legacy, multiplied tenfold under his ruthless vision. To new beginnings, the crowd echoed. 500 crystal glasses rose in unison. The sound of them chiming together was like bells, like approval made audible. Damien smiled his boardroom smile, the one that had closed billion-dollar deals and intimidated competitors into submission. But behind that smile, in a place he rarely acknowledged even to himself, something felt hollow. He looked at Genevieve, at her perfect smile and perfect dress and perfect everything, and waited to feel something beyond satisfaction at having acquired another beautiful thing. Nothing came. He pushed the thought away. This was what success looked like. This was what he'd worked for. A partner who understood his world, who wouldn't demand things he couldn't give, who fit seamlessly into the empire he'd built. It was practical, strategic, smart. It should have been enough. Genevieve leaned into him, her lips brushing his ear. "They're eating it up," she whispered. "Page 6 is going to love this." Of course they were. That was the point, wasn't it? The spectacle, the story, the image of two beautiful, successful people joining their empires. The crowd began to mingle again, conversations resuming in that particular tone of the very wealthy, discussing stock portfolios and vacation homes and which charity gala they'd attend next. Damien shook hands and accepted congratulations, his mind already drifting to the Tokyo deal that needed his attention, to the Singapore property that was hemorrhaging money, to the 1,000 other details that constantly demanded his focus. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed it, the moment when the energy in the room shifted, when conversations faltered mid-sentence, when heads began to turn toward the entrance like sunflowers following light. The massive double doors of the ballroom swung open, and there she was. The murmur of conversation died, as if someone had cut the strings of sound itself. Damien's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. His heart, that reliable organ that had beaten steadily through board meetings and hostile takeovers and billion-dollar negotiations, suddenly felt like it might stop altogether. Vivian Monroe. His Vivian. Except she wasn't his anymore, was she? She never had been, not really. Not in the way that mattered. But God, she was devastating. 6 years had transformed her. The woman who had left his penthouse wearing jeans and a broken heart now stood framed in the doorway, wearing a gown of midnight silk that moved like water over her body, catching light and shadow with each breath. The dress was elegant, understated, and clearly cost a fortune. Not the kind of fortune that screamed new money, but the quiet, confident expense of someone who had nothing to prove. Diamonds glittered her throat, not the delicate pieces he'd once given her, which she'd left behind when she walked out of his life. These were bold, statement jewels that declared their own sovereignty, each one probably worth more than a luxury car. Her dark hair, once loose and wild in his hands, now swept into an elegant twist that exposed the graceful column of her neck. She wore minimal makeup, but she didn't need it. Time had refined her features, added depth to her beauty. She looked like power personified, like success made flesh. But it wasn't Vivian's transformation that commanded every eye in the room. It was the 3 children holding her hands. 2 girls flanked a boy, none of them older than 5 or 6. They were dressed in coordinated formal, where that somehow managed to be both adorable and impossibly sophisticated. The little boy wore a miniature tuxedo that matched Damien's own. The girls wore dresses of soft blue that complemented their mother's midnight gown. And they all 3 of them, had Damien's face. The boy had his sharp jawline, already evident even in childhood. One of the girls had his distinctive amber eyes, unusual and striking. The other had his rare smile, the real one, not the corporate mask he wore like armor. Even from across the ballroom, the resemblance was unmistakable, undeniable. Damien felt the room, tilt. Felt his carefully controlled world shift on its axis. "Who is that?" Genevieve hissed beside him, her perfect composure cracking. "Damien, who is that woman?" But Damien couldn't answer, couldn't breathe, couldn't process anything beyond the impossible mathematics standing in his ballroom doorway. 3 children, with his eyes, his features, his blood. Vivian's gaze found his across the sea of stunned faces. Those storm gray eyes he'd once lost himself in now held something he couldn't quite read. Not triumph, not anger, just calm certainty, as if she'd known exactly what kind of earthquake she was about to trigger and had decided to do it anyway. She moved forward, and the crowd parted before her like the Red Sea. Each step she took in those designer heels. He recognized them now. Limited edition Louboutins that cost more than most people's monthly rent was measured. Deliberate. A countdown to detonation. Margot Chun materialized beside Vivian almost immediately. The society columnist whose whispers could make or break reputations, whose column was required reading for anyone who mattered in Manhattan, looked like she'd just won the lottery. Her eyes glittered with the scent of the story of the year. "Ms. Monroe," Margot gushed, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "What a surprise. We'd heard you were in Singapore. And these beautiful children." "My triplets," Vivian said smoothly, her voice carrying that same quiet confidence as her appearance. Damien felt that voice like a physical touch, like silk dragging across his skin. He'd forgotten, or maybe he'd forced himself to forget, how it used to sound whispering his name in darkness. "Julian, Celeste, and Amelie. Say hello to Ms. Chun, darlings." "Hello, Ms. Chun," 3 small voices chorused in perfect unison. Polite, well-trained, clearly accustomed to adult attention. Damien watched, paralyzed, as his children, God, how could they be his children, charmed a room full of strangers while he stood frozen on a platform beside a woman he was supposed to marry in 6 weeks. "I must say," Margot continued, her journalist instincts clearly sensing blood in the water, "they bear a striking resemblance to our host." Vivian's smile was serene. "Dangerous, do they? How interesting." She moved closer. The crowd parted further, everyone straining to hear, to see, to witness whatever was about to unfold. Phone cameras appeared. This would be all over social media within minutes. Damien could already see the headlines forming. Another guest, a tech investor Damien recognized but couldn't name, stepped forward with eyes wide. "And that car outside, is that a custom Phantom Serenity?" "Yes," Vivian said simply, as if discussing the weather. "I treated myself. The craftsmanship is extraordinary." The tech investor looked like he might faint. "The Phantom Serenity," he explained to those around him, his voice reverent. "There are only 3 in existence. Each one is custom-built. They cost over $100 million. A ripple went through the crowd. $100 million. For a car. The kind of purchase that declared a certain level of wealth. The kind of wealth that didn't come from a successful career. The kind that came from empire. Damien's mind reeled. $100 million car. Vivian, who'd been a junior architect when he'd known her. Vivian, who'd lived in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn and taken the subway to work. Vivian, who'd left him with nothing but her clothes and her dignity. This wasn't the woman he'd known. This was something else entirely. When Vivian reached the base of the platform, where Damien stood with Genevieve, she stopped, looked up. The children looked up too, 3 pairs of eyes so familiar it physically hurt. "Hello, Damien," Vivian said softly. Her voice was steady, controlled, giving nothing away. "Thank you for the invitation. We need to talk." "You," Damien started, but his legendary composure, the unshakable control that had made him feared in boardrooms across the world, evaporated like morning mist. His throat was tight. His hands were shaking. "Vivian, who are they?" The little boy, the one in the miniature tuxedo that matched Damien's own, tugged at Vivian's gown. Man," he said, his voice high and clear and carrying across the silent ballroom. "Is that him? Is that our father?" "Father." The word hit Damien like a physical blow, like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart with an iron fist. The girl with his amber eyes, Celeste, Vivian had called her, studied him with solemn intensity. He's taller than in the pictures, she observed. And he looks confused, the third child added, the quiet one, Amelie. Man, does he not know about us? We'll talk about it, darling, Vivian said gently, her hand stroking Amelie's hair. Not here. Damien, Genevieve's voice sliced through his paralysis like a knife. Her nails dug into his arm hard enough to hurt. What is happening? Who are these children? He looked at his fiancée, at this woman he'd proposed to because she was suitable, convenient, appropriate for a man of his position. A strategic alliance dressed up as romance. He convinced himself it was enough. That partnership was more realistic than passion. That compatibility mattered more than connection. Looking at Vivian and 3 children who had his blood, his features, pieces of his soul he hadn't known were missing, he understood with devastating clarity what a lie he'd been living. I don't know, he heard himself say, the words hollow, mechanical. I don't, Vivian. Vivian's expression remained perfectly composed, but something flickered in her eyes. Something that might have been satisfaction or might have been pain. They're yours, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos beginning to erupt around them. All 3 of them. And yes, before you ask, you never knew. I never told you. The ballroom exploded. Voices rose in a cacophony of shock and speculation. Camera flashes went off like lightning. Phones appeared everywhere, recording, photographing, live streaming. Damien could see it happening in real time, the story spreading like wildfire across social media. His publicist was probably already having a heart attack. Genevieve jerked away from him as if he'd burned her. You have children? Her voice was shrill, her careful composure shattered. 3 children? With her? I didn't know, Damien said, but the words sounded weak even to his own ears. You didn't know, Genevieve repeated, her laugh sharp and bitter. You didn't know you have 3 children? I didn't, Damien insisted, but he was looking at Vivian, not Genevieve. Vivian, please, we need to talk. Privately. Vivian tilted her head slightly, considering. The harbor view, she said finally. Suite 3000. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. Vivian, Damien started, stepping down from the platform, but Genevieve's voice stopped him. Don't, she said, her voice cold as ice. Don't you dare walk away from me right now. But Damien barely heard her. His eyes were locked on the children. On Julian, studying him with intelligent eyes that held questions Damien didn't know how to answer. On Celeste, fearless and direct, meeting his gaze without flinching. On Amelie, quiet and watchful, holding her mother's hand like an anchor. Are you going to marry that lady? Julian asked suddenly, pointing at Genevieve with the brutal honesty only children possess. No, Damien said, the word out before he could think, looking at Genevieve, at the fury in her eyes, at the spectacle they'd created. He knew it was true. That's over. Good, Celeste declared with satisfaction. She has mean eyes. Celeste, Vivian chided gently, but there was no real reproach in her voice. That's not kind, but it's true, the little girl insisted, crossing her arms in a gesture so like Damien's own stubborn stance that it took his breath away. Genevieve made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a scream. She turned to Damien, her face flushed with humiliation and rage. We're done, she spat. Don't call me. Don't contact me. My lawyers will be in touch. She yanked the engagement ring off her finger and threw it at his chest with impressive aim. The diamond bounced off his tuxedo and clattered to the marble floor. Then she turned and stormed through the crowd, which parted quickly to let her pass. The massive doors slammed behind her with a sound like thunder. The silence that followed was deafening. Damien looked at Vivian. She looked back, her expression unreadable. Then, with grace and dignity that seemed impossible given the circus around them, she turned to her children. Say goodbye, darlings, she said softly. We need to go. But man, Julian protested. I want to talk to him. Tomorrow, Vivian promised. Papa will come visit tomorrow, and you can talk all you want. Right now, we need to let him process this. Papa. She called him Papa, as if it were already decided. As if these 3 children were already his, not in biology, but in relationship. Damien watched, helpless, as Vivian gathered the children and moved toward the exit. Security appeared from nowhere, clearly her people, forming a protective barrier around them. The crowd pressed in, questions flying, cameras flashing, but Vivian moved through it all like a queen, untouchable and serene. At the door, she paused, looked back over her shoulder, found Damien's eyes across the chaos. 2 p.m., she repeated. Don't be late. Then she was gone, taking the children with her, leaving Damien standing alone in the ruins of his engagement party while 500 of Manhattan's elite watched and recorded and whispered. His phone was already ringing, vibrating so hard in his pocket it felt like an earthquake. Board members, his publicist, his lawyers, his parents, business partners. Everyone who just watched his life implode in real time and wanted answers he didn't have. He ignored them all, walked through the crowd in a daze, made it to the exit. Outside, under the portico, a cluster of guests had gathered around something, their phones out, photographing. The car. Damien pushed through to see it. The Phantom Serenity sat at the curb like a work of art. Midnight blue, almost black, with custom details that probably took craftsmen years to complete. The kind of car that declared wealth, so vast it became irrelevant. Inside, through tinted windows, he could just make out 3 small figures in car seats. Then the car pulled away, silent as a ghost, taking his children, God, his children, into the Manhattan night. Damien stood on the sidewalk in his $1,000 tuxedo, surrounded by the people who defined success in his world, and felt more alone than he'd ever been in his life. His penthouse was 43 floors above Manhattan, all glass and steel and architectural brutality. Damien stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows at 2 a.m., still in his tuxedo, watching the city glitter below him like scattered diamonds. He hadn't slept. How could he? Somewhere out there in those lights, he had 3 children, 3 living, breathing pieces of himself walking around in the world. And until 3 hours ago, he hadn't even known they existed. His phone lay on the marble counter behind him, silent now after hours of constant vibration. 237 missed calls, 318 text messages, 47 emails marked urgent. His publicist had sent increasingly frantic voicemails. His lawyer wanted an emergency meeting. His board chairman demanded an explanation. Damien had ignored them all. Instead, he'd been scrolling through social media, watching his life become a trending topic in real time. Hashtag Russo secret babies. Hashtag billionaire baby drama. Hashtag mystery ex-wife. The photos were everywhere. Vivian in her midnight gown. The children with their unmistakable resemblance. The moment his champagne glass shattered. Genevieve throwing her ring. Every moment of his humiliation captured and shared and commented on by strangers. But it was the speculation about Vivian that made him keep scrolling, unable to stop like pressing on a bruise. Who is she? One tweet asked. That's not just designer, that's custom couture. And that car, that's CAR. Vivian Monroe. Someone replied with a link. CEO of Monroe Architectural Innovations. Self-made billionaire. Estimated net worth $7 billion. $7 billion. Damien stared at the number until it stopped making sense. Another post, this one with photos from an architectural magazine. Vivian cutting a ribbon at some building opening, looking powerful and confident in a hard hat and construction gear. The caption identified it as the Brisbane Sustainable Tower, a revolutionary mixed-use development that was apparently changing the future of urban architecture. Damien clicked through to more articles. Awards, accolades, features in Forbes, in Fortune, in Architectural Digest. Vivian Monroe, the youngest woman ever nominated for the Pritzker Prize. Vivian Monroe, inventor of the sustainable composite material revolutionizing construction. Vivian Monroe, who'd sold her stake in the manufacturing company for $2.8 billion. Vivian Monroe, who'd apparently built an empire while raising 3 children alone. His children. Damien's reflection stared back at him from the dark window. 38 years old. $18 billion empire. Penthouse in Manhattan. hotels on 5 continents, everything he'd ever worked for, and he'd never felt more bankrupt in his life. His phone rang. Unknown number. It was 2:47 in the morning. Damien grabbed it. "Vivian?" Her voice came through, steady and controlled. "The Harbor View. Suite 3000. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone." "I need to understand," Damien started, but she cut him off. "Tomorrow, Damien. Not tonight. They need routine. Stability. One more normal night before everything changes." "Are they?" He swallowed hard. "Are they really mine?" There was a pause. When Vivian spoke again, her voice was softer, quieter. "Yes, they're really yours. Why didn't you tell me?" "Tomorrow," she repeated. "We'll talk tomorrow." The line went dead. Damien stood holding his phone, staring at the screen. Then, slowly, he sank onto the leather sofa that had cost more than a luxury car and felt about as comfortable as a bed of nails. 3 children. Triplets. He did the math quickly. They looked about 5 or 6, which meant Vivian had been pregnant when she left him, or found out shortly after. 6 years. 6 years of birthdays and first steps and bedtime stories. 6 years of moments he'd never get back. His laptop sat on a coffee table. Damien opened it, pulled up a search engine, typed in her name. The results were overwhelming. Hundreds of articles. Thousands of photos. A woman he barely recognized, though her face was the same one he'd loved, the same one that had haunted his dreams for 6 years. He clicked on an article from Business Insider. The headline read, "How Vivian Monroe Built a $7 billion Empire While Raising Triplets Alone." His hands shook as he read. Vivian Monroe discovered she was pregnant with triplets 1 week after her divorce from an unnamed tech executive. Facing single motherhood of 3 children, the then 28-year-old junior architect made a choice that would change her life. Instead of requesting child support or relying on her ex-husband's wealth, she returned to school, completed her master's degree in sustainable architecture, and began developing what would become the most revolutionary building material of the decade. The Vern Composite, named after her children Julian Verne Monroe, Celeste Verne Monroe, and Amelie Verne Monroe, is stronger than steel, lighter than aluminum, and completely recyclable. Monroe patented the formula when her children were 6 months old, working from her studio apartment while they slept. Damien kept reading, the words blurring together. She'd gone to classes 9 months pregnant with triplets, given birth at 32 weeks, 3 premature babies who spent weeks in NICU, brought them home to a tiny apartment with help from her mother, worked 3 jobs while developing her composite material, filed the patent while running on 2 hours of sleep a night, started her architectural firm when the triplets were 2, took out loans, risked everything, built it slowly, carefully, one project at a time. The big break came when she was hired to design a community center in Queens. The project caught the attention of a developer in Australia, who hired her for a larger commission. Then another. 3 years ago, her firm went public. The valuation shocked Wall Street. Monroe Architectural Innovations was worth $4.2 billion, and Vivian owned 60% of the shares. 2 years ago, she sold her stake in the Verne Composite Manufacturing Company for $2.8 billion. Last year, she won the contract to design the Museum of Contemporary Art in Dubai. $60 million project. The building was being called the future of sustainable architecture. She'd done all of this while raising 3 children, alone, because he'd let her go, because he'd chosen his empire over her, because he'd been too much of a coward to see what actually mattered. Damien closed the laptop, put his head in his hands, and for the first time since his grandfather's funeral 15 years ago, he cried. Dawn broke slowly over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Damien hadn't moved from the sofa. His tuxedo was wrinkled. His bow tie hung undone around his neck. His eyes were red-rimmed and raw. At 6 a.m., his phone chimed with an email from his assistant, Patricia, who'd worked for him for 8 years and knew his schedule better than he did. Subject line, research you'll want to see. Damien opened it, found a comprehensive file on Vivian Monroe. Patricia was nothing if not thorough, but it was the photos that destroyed him. Not the professional shots from magazines and award ceremonies. The personal ones, pulled from social media, from the children's private school newsletter, from charity events. Vivian pregnant, her belly impossibly huge with 3 babies. Vivian in a hospital bed, exhausted but smiling, holding 3 tiny newborns. Vivian at the children's first birthday party, alone except for an elderly woman who must have been her mother. The children learning to walk, all 3 of them, Vivian kneeling on the floor with her arms spread wide to catch them. First day of preschool. 3 small figures in matching uniforms, holding hands. Vivian behind them, her smile brave, but her eyes sad. Halloween costumes. Birthday parties. Piano recitals. School plays. A life documented in photos that he wasn't in. Had never been in. Would never be in. The last photo in the file was recent. Vivian and the children at the opening of the Brisbane Tower. All 4 of them dressed formally. Vivian in the center, a child tucked under each arm, Julian standing in front of her. They were smiling at each other, not the camera, caught in some private joke. A family, complete without him. Damien stared at that photo until the screen went dark. Then he stood, walked to his bedroom, stripped off his tuxedo, and stood in the shower until the water ran cold. At 1:45 p.m., Damien stood outside Suite 3000 of the Harborview Hotel. The boutique property was his competition, technically. Smaller than his hotels, more intimate, but highly regarded for its service and discretion. Neutral ground. His hands shook as he raised them to knock. He'd changed into dark jeans and a simple button-down. Left the designer clothes and expensive watch at home. Wanted to look approachable. Human. Like someone who could be a father. Did he look like a father? What did a father even look like? The door opened before he could knock. Vivian stood there in simple jeans and a cream cashmere sweater. No makeup. Hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger this way. More like the woman he'd known 6 years ago. More like his Vivian. Except she'd never been his. He was starting to understand that now. They're at the park with my security team, Vivian said quietly, stepping aside to let him enter. I thought we should talk first. Alone. The suite was elegant but comfortable. Clearly lived in, not just stayed in. Children's artwork hung on the walls in expensive frames, each piece carefully matted and displayed as if it were gallery-worthy. A grand piano stood in one corner, sheet music scattered across it. Toys were organized in bins, books lined a shelf, 3 pairs of small shoes sat by the door. This wasn't a hotel suite. This was a home. Damien moved into the living area, his eyes cataloging every detail. A puzzle half finished on a coffee table. 3 different colors of crayon scattered on the dining table. A stack of picture books about space and ocean and mathematics. His children lived here. His children. Triplets, he said, his voice rough. You were carrying triplets. And you never. Why didn't you tell me? Vivian moved to the window, her back to him. You made it very clear that your empire was your priority, that I was an inconvenience to your ambitions. That's not. I never said, Damien protested, but the words died in his throat because they both knew the truth. You didn't have to say it, Damien. Vivian turned, and her eyes were calm. Not angry, not hurt, just certain, the way you looked at absolute truth and accepted it. You showed me every single day that your work mattered more than we did. When I found out I was pregnant a week after we broke up, I had a choice to make. You should have told me, Damien insisted, his voice rising. I had a right to know. Why? Vivian tilted her head, genuinely curious. So you could send money? Arrange for nannies? Fit fatherhood into your schedule between board meetings? I didn't want financial support from a man who couldn't give emotional support. I had a right to know I was going to be a father. Did you? Vivian's voice was soft, but sharp as a blade. Rights come with responsibilities, Damien. You'd made it abundantly clear you didn't want the responsibility of a relationship. Why would I burden you with 3 children? The logic was devastating because it was rooted in his own actions, and the man he'd been, the choices he'd made. Damien sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. Tell me about them. Please. Just tell me about my children. Vivian sat across from him, maintaining distance. When she spoke, her voice softened slightly, the way it did when she talked about things she loved. Julian is the oldest by 2 minutes. He's brilliant, scary brilliant. He taught himself to read at 3. Now he's doing mathematics that most 10-year-olds couldn't handle. But he's also sensitive, empathetic. He cries during sad movies and rescues injured birds. Last month, he found a baby sparrow that had fallen from its nest. We spent 2 weeks feeding it with an eyedropper every 2 hours until it could fly. Despite everything, despite the pain and regret crushing his chest, Damien smiled at the image. Celeste is fearless. Vivian's expression warmed, pride evident in every word. She climbs everything, argues with everyone, questions all authority, including mine. She's training in 3 different martial arts. She wants to be an astronaut or a deep-sea explorer, or possibly both. She has your eyes and your stubborn refusal to accept limitations. She's also fiercely protective of her siblings. Last week, a boy at school was teasing Amelie. Celeste made him cry. And the third? Damien asked quietly. Amelie is my artist. Vivian gestured to the framed artwork on the walls. All of these are hers. She sees the world in colors and shapes the rest of us miss. She speaks 4 languages, French, Spanish, Mandarin, and English, because she says each one has a different emotional texture. She plays piano by ear and composes her own pieces. She's quieter than her siblings, more reserved. But when she speaks, everyone listens because she only says things that matter. Damien's throat was tight. They sound extraordinary. They are. There was no pride in Vivian's voice, just fact. I made sure of it. They attend Whitmore Academy, the best private school in Manhattan. They have tutors for their individual interests. Music lessons, art classes, chess club, sports teams. They've traveled to 20 countries. They're confident, kind, curious about the world. You've done all of this alone. I had help. Nannies when they were babies. Tutors now. My assistant helps coordinate their schedules. But yes, fundamentally, I did alone. By choice. Damien looked up at her. And now? Why come my engagement party? Why don't we now? Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Because 3 months ago, Julian asked me why he didn't have a father. Not in a sad way. He wasn't feeling deprived. He was just curious. Why did some children have fathers and others didn't? What did you tell him? The truth. That his father didn't know about him. That I'd made the choice not to tell him. Vivian met his gaze directly. And then Amelie asked if they could meet you someday. If they could decide for themselves whether they wanted you in their lives. So you came to my engagement party. I came because I owe my children the opportunity to know their father, regardless of our history. Vivian's voice was firm. This isn't about you and me, Damien. It's about them. They deserve the chance to make their own choice. And if I want to be part of their lives, then you'll have to earn it. Vivian said it simply, as if it were obvious. Not with money, they have plenty of that. With time, consistency, presence, all the things you couldn't give me 6 years ago. Before Damien could respond, the suite door opened. Small voices filled the space, high and excited, talking over each other in that way children did. "Man," Celeste called out, loud and enthusiastic. We saw 17 dogs at the park, and one of them was a Bernese Mountain Dog, and it was huge, and she stopped mid-sentence seeing Damien. All 3 children froze in the doorway. Damien stood slowly, his heart hammering. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Julian had his exact jawline, already sharp even at 5 years old. Celeste's amber eyes were identical to his own, down to the small flecks of gold. Amelie had his rare smile, the one that transformed his whole face. They were his. Unmistakably, undeniably his. "Hello," he managed, his voice shaking. I'm your father." Julian stepped forward first, studying Damien with those intelligent eyes. He tilted his head, slightly analytical. "You look like the picture Man showed us," he observed, "but older and sadder." Amelie added quietly from her position beside her sister. "I'm not sad," Damien said quickly, though his eyes were burning. I'm overwhelmed. You're all so beautiful." "We know," Celeste said matter-of-factly. Man says beauty is genetic, but kindness is a choice. Despite everything, despite the emotional tornado ripping through him, Damien laughed. Your mother is very wise. Are you going to marry that lady from the party? Julian asked with the brutal directness only children possessed. No, Damien said, looking past the children to Vivian. That's over. Good, Celeste declared, crossing her arms. She had mean eyes. Damien felt something crack in his chest, something that had been frozen for 6 years. These were his children, real, breathing, thinking, feeling human beings with opinions and personalities, and his features mixed with their mother's grace. Can't, he started then stopped. Cleared his throat. Tried again. Can I sit with you? Just to talk? 3 pairs of eyes turned to Vivian, seeking permission. She hesitated, then nodded. For a little while. Then we need to have dinner. The children moved into the living room. Julian sat on the sofa beside Damien, maintaining careful distance. Celeste climbed into an armchair and tucked her feet under her, watching him with open curiosity. Amelie stayed standing, holding her mother's hand like an anchor. What do you want to know about us? Julian asked. Man says when you're meeting someone new, questions are how you learn. Damien looked at this small, brilliant boy and felt his heart stutter. Everything. I want to know everything. That's not specific, Celeste pointed out. You need to ask actual questions. Okay, Damien thought quickly. What do you like to do? I like chess and mathematics and reading about space, Julian said immediately. I'm teaching myself calculus. At 5 years old? Damien couldn't hide his shock. I'm almost 6, Julian corrected. And it's not that hard once you understand the basic principles. I like martial arts, Celeste jumped in, and climbing, and arguing. Man says I'm going to be a lawyer because I always have to be right. You don't always have to be right, Amelie said softly. You just think you do. See? Celeste grinned. She's arguing with me about arguing. And you? Damien asked Amelie gently. What do you like? Colors, Amelie said simply. And music, and languages. I'm learning Mandarin. Man says that when you know different languages, you can understand different ways of thinking, Julian added. So we're all learning at least 2. Damien looked at Vivian, standing by the window, watching this interaction with careful eyes. You've raised remarkable children. I know, she said simply. Why did you leave? Celeste asked suddenly, her directness cutting through the moment like a knife. Man says you didn't know about us, but why did you leave her in the first place? Damien felt all the air leave his lungs. The simple question he didn't know how to answer. Because I was scared, he said finally, choosing honesty over comfort. And selfish. I thought my company was the most important thing in my life. I thought success meant building a bigger empire than my grandfather. I thought, he paused, forcing himself to meet Celeste's sharp amber eyes. I thought wrong. Do you still think wrong? Amelie asked quietly. No, Damien said. Now I think I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I don't know if I can fix it. Man says you can't fix the past, Julian observed. You can only choose different in the future. Your mother is very wise, Damien repeated, his voice thick. The conversation continued, children asking questions with that particular lack of filter that made every query both innocent and devastating. What's your favorite color? Do you like dogs? Where do you live? Why didn't you want to be our father before? Each question landed like a blow and a gift. They were getting to know him, testing him, deciding if he was worth their time. An hour passed, then another. Vivian eventually interrupted gently. Okay, my loves. Papa needs to go now. You need dinner and homework. But we just started talking, Celeste protested. Can I? Damien found himself asking before he could think. Can I come back? Tomorrow maybe? 3 heads turned to Vivian again. She considered, her expression unreadable. We'll see, she said finally. Let's take this slowly. Damien stood. Looked down at 3 children who were his in biology, but strangers in every way that mattered. Thank you, he said to all of them, for letting me visit, for giving me a chance. Julian stood too, held out his hand formally. It was nice to meet you, he said with the politeness of a child who'd been well taught. Damien shook his son's hand, the small fingers warm in his own, and felt something inside him shatter and rebuild simultaneously. Maybe next time you can teach me calculus, he said softly. Julian's face lit up. Really? Most adults don't want to learn. I want to learn everything you can teach me. As Damien moved to the door, Vivian followed. In the hallway, with the door closed behind them, she spoke quietly. "Don't hurt them," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes held steel. "They've grown up without you. They've managed. But if you start this and then walk away again because it's too hard or you're too busy, I won't forgive that." "They won't forgive that." "I won't," Damien promised. His voice was fierce. "Vivian, I swear to you I won't." She studied him for a long moment. "We'll see." "Actions, Damien, not promises. Show me." Then she slipped back into the suite, leaving him in the hallway, his heart both fuller and more empty than it had been in 6 years. Damien stood outside his own building and realized he didn't want to go inside. Didn't want to return to that glass and steel monument to his success. It felt hollow now, meaningless. Instead, he walked through Manhattan as evening fell, past restaurants and shops, and people living their lives. He found himself in Central Park, sitting on a bench, watching families. A father pushing a daughter on a swing. A mother helping a son climb monkey bars. A whole family having a picnic, 3 kids running around while parents laughed. He'd missed 6 years of this. 6 years of the mundane magic that made life worth living. His phone vibrated. "Patricia, need you to sign off on Tokyo deal by end of week." Damien stared at the message. The Tokyo deal. 3 months ago, it would have been his only priority. Now it felt like background noise. He typed back, "Delegate to Mitchell. I trust his judgment." A pause. Then, "Are you okay?" Damien looked at the families around him. The children laughing. The parents tired but happy. "No," he typed, "but I'm going to be." Over the next 3 days, Damien restructured his entire existence. He sat in his corner office overlooking Manhattan and did something he'd never done in 15 years of running the Russo collection. He delegated. Mitchell, his COO, looked shocked when Damien called him in. "You want me to handle the Singapore expansion entirely?" "You're more than capable," Damien said. "I trust your judgment. But you've been hands-on with every major decision since you took over from your grandfather." "Things change," Damien replied, looking at the photo on his phone. The one he'd saved from the school newsletter Patricia had sent. 3 children holding hands on their first day of kindergarten. "My priorities have changed." Word spread through the company quickly. Damien Russo was stepping back. Not retiring, not selling, but consciously choosing to be less involved in day-to-day operations. The board was concerned. Investors were nervous. His executive team didn't know what to make of it. Damien didn't care. On the 4th day after the engagement party, Vivian texted him. An actual text, not a call. "Progress. The children would like to see you again. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. Dinner at the suite. Don't be late." Damien read the message 17 times. Then he went shopping. The toy store overwhelmed him. Aisles of plastic and primary colors and things that beeped and flashed. He stood in the entrance, paralyzed by choice. A sales associate approached. "Can I help you find something?" Damien started, then stopped. "I have children. Triplets. 5 years old. Almost 6. I don't know what they like." The woman's expression softened. "First time shopping for them?" "First time knowing they exist," Damien admitted. To her credit, she didn't react beyond a slight widening of eyes. "Okay, tell me about them. What are they interested in?" Damien pulled out his phone, showed her the notes he'd been compiling. Everything the children had mentioned during their brief conversation. Julian likes chess and mathematics and space. Celeste likes martial arts and climbing and arguing. Amelie likes colors and music and languages. The woman smiled. "I can work with this." An hour later, Damien left with carefully chosen gifts. An advanced chess set for Julian, the kind used in professional tournaments. A rock climbing starter kit for Celeste, with a promise to take her to a real climbing gym if her mother approved. A professional art set for Amelie, with paints and pastels and more colors than Damien knew existed. Then he went to a bookstore, found books about mathematics for young readers. Picture books about space in 4 languages. A guide to martial arts for children. In his car, surrounded by shopping bags, Damien realized he was terrified. More terrified than before any board meeting or investor presentation, because this mattered in a way nothing else ever had. He arrived at the harbor view at 5:45. Early, but he couldn't wait any longer. Security recognized him now, nodded him through without question. At the suite door, he could hear voices inside, children arguing good-naturedly about something. Vivian's voice, patient and firm, settling the dispute. The sound of a normal family evening. Damien knocked at exactly 6 p.m. The door flew open. Celeste stood there, grinning. "You came back." "Of course I came back," Damien said, crouching to her eye level. "I said I would. Lots of adults say things they don't mean." She informed him matter-of-factly. "Man says actions matter more than words. Your mother is right." "I know. She's almost always right. It's annoying." Celeste grabbed his hand, pulling him inside. "Come on. Julian wants to show you his math homework, and Amelie painted something, and I learned a new kick." The suite felt different this time. Less intimidating, more welcoming. Julian appeared from the dining area, a workbook in his hands. "Look, this is the problem my tutor gave me, but I solved it a different way, and I want to know if it's still correct, even though I used a different method." Damien looked at the problem. Advanced algebra. The kind he remembered from high school. His almost 6-year-old son had solved it using a method Damien had never seen before. Damien studied the work. "This is brilliant. Your method actually simplifies the process." Julian beamed. "Really?" Mr. Peterson said it was unconventional. Unconventional and brilliant aren't mutually exclusive. Amelie approached more slowly, holding a canvas. She didn't speak, just held it up for him to see. The painting took Damien's breath away. Abstract shapes in blues and greens and purples, flowing together like water, like sky, like emotions made visible. "This is extraordinary," he said softly. "What inspired it?" Amelie said simply. "When you left the other day, you looked sad and hopeful at the same time. I wanted to see what that looked like." Damien felt his eyes burn. "You captured it perfectly." From the kitchen, Vivian called out, "Dinner in 10 minutes. Hands washed, everyone." The children scattered. Damien stood in the living room, holding Amelie's painting, feeling more at home than he'd felt in his own penthouse in years. Vivian emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She wore jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup, completely natural, devastatingly beautiful. "You came," she said. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I wasn't sure." She studied him. "You brought gifts." "Too much." Damien gestured to the bags he'd left by the door. "We'll see." "If you're trying to buy their affection." "I'm not," he said quickly. I want to show them I was listening." When they told me what they liked. Vivian's expression softened slightly. That's good. Listening is good." Dinner was chaotic and perfect. The children talked over each other, debated everything from the best way to eat spaghetti to whether Mars or Europa was more likely to have life. Vivian refereed with practiced ease, keeping the conversation from devolving into actual argument while letting them express their opinions. Damien watched it all with wonder. This was family, real family, not the sterile dinners of his childhood, where silence was expected and opinions were discouraged. This was loud and messy and full of love. "Papa," Celeste said, and Damien's heart stopped because it was the first time one of them had called him that directly to his face. "Do you know martial arts?" "I don't," Damien admitted. "Want to learn? I could teach you." "I would love that." After dinner, after the gifts were opened with gratifying enthusiasm, after Julian beat him soundly at chess, and Celeste demonstrated her new kick, and Amelie played a piece she'd composed on the piano, the children reluctantly went to get ready for bed. Vivian and Damien stood in the kitchen, washing dishes in waited silence. "Thank you," Damien said finally, "for letting me come. For giving me this chance." "I'm not doing it for you," Vivian replied, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm doing it for them." "I know, but still." "Thank you." She handed him a plate to dry. "You're different than you were." "I hope so." "What changed?" "Not just finding out about them. Something changed in you before that." Damien dried the plate carefully, considering. "I got engaged to the wrong person for the wrong reasons. I stood in a ballroom full of people celebrating me, and I felt nothing. Empty. Like I'd built this massive empire and forgotten to build a life. And now I know what I was missing." He set the plate down, turned to face her. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Vivian. I don't deserve that. But I'm asking for the chance to be their father. Really be their father. Not just financially, but present. Involved. Here. For how long? Her eyes were sharp. Until it gets hard? Until board meetings conflict with piano recitals? Until your empire needs you more than they do? For as long as they'll have me, Damien said. I've already delegated most of my operational responsibilities. I'm keeping strategic oversight, but I'm not running day to day anymore. You restructured your entire company? I restructured my entire life. Vivian studied him for a long moment. We'll see. Consistency, Damien. That's what they need. Not grand gestures. Just showing up. Every day. Even when it's boring. Especially when it's boring. I understand. Do you? Because you've never had to do boring. You've lived your whole life chasing the next big thing. The next deal. The next achievement. Being a parent isn't achievements. It's endless repetition. It's the same bedtime story for the 50th time. It's wiping noses and settling arguments and being there for moments that aren't Instagram-worthy. I want those moments, Damien said fiercely. I want all of it. The boring, the hard, the repetitive. I want breakfast before school and homework help and regular Tuesday nights. Her expression softened slightly. Okay, we'll try. Over the following weeks, Damien fell into a rhythm he'd never experienced before. Every evening at 6, he appeared at Vivian's suite. Sometimes he stayed for dinner. Sometimes just for an hour. Always, he showed up. He learned that Julian needed help winding down before bed. That his brilliant mind raced too fast, keeping him awake unless someone helped him process the day. So Damien started coming early on weekdays, sitting with Julian while he did homework, talking through whatever mathematical concept or scientific question was occupying his thoughts. One evening, while Julian worked through a geometry problem, he asked casually, "Why did you and Maman stop being married?" Damien set down the paper he'd been reading. "That's a complicated question. I'm smart. I can understand complicated." Fair point. Damien considered how to be honest without being inappropriate. When your mother and I were together, I wasn't a very good partner. I worked all the time. I missed dinners and anniversaries and important moments because I thought my company was more important. Was it more important? No, Damien said simply. I just thought it was. I was wrong. Do you still love her? The question landed like a bomb. Damien looked at his son, this brilliant, perceptive, almost 6-year-old, and couldn't lie. Yes, but that doesn't matter. What matters is being here for you and your sisters. Julian considered this with his characteristic seriousness. Amelie thinks you still love her too. Maman, I mean. She says she can see it in colors around you when you look at her. Amelie sees feelings in colors. She sees everything in colors. It's weird, but also kind of cool. Connecting with Celeste was different. She didn't want deep conversations. She wanted action. So Damien took her to a climbing gym, watching with his heart in his throat as she scaled walls that seemed impossibly high. She was fearless, attacking each route with determination and strategy. You should try, she called down from 20 feet up. I don't think I can do that, Damien admitted. You won't know until you try. That's what Maman always says. So Damien climbed. Terribly, awkwardly, muscles shaking and hands sweating. But he climbed. And when he reached the top of the beginner wall, Celeste cheered like he'd summit Everest. You did it, she exclaimed when he came down. You were scared, but you did it anyway. That's bravery. I'll learn from the best, he told her. She grinned, then grew serious. Papa, if you hurt Maman again, I'll be really mad at you. I won't, he promised. Good, because she cries sometimes at night when she thinks we're asleep. She's been less sad since you came back, but if you make her sad again, She struggled to find an appropriate threat. You'll kick me? Damien suggested gently. Yeah, really hard. In the shins. That's fair. Amelie remained the most reserved. She watched him with those careful eyes, assessing, measuring. She answered questions, but didn't volunteer information. She was polite, but distant. Damien didn't push. Just try to show up for her the way he did for her siblings. 2 weeks after his first dinner with them, he arrived to find Amelie alone in the suite's living room, sitting at the piano. Vivian was in her home office on a conference call. The other children were at a birthday party with their nanny. May I listen? Damien asked quietly. Amelie nodded without looking at him. She played something haunting and complex. Minor keys that spoke of sadness, but also hope, of loss and finding. The music filled the space, filled Damien's chest until he could barely breathe. When she finished, silence hung heavy. That was beautiful, Damien said. Does it have a name? It's about Man, Amelie said softly. When she's sad but trying to hide it. Is she sad often? Less than before. Amelie turned to look at him. But sometimes at night, I hear her crying. Not loud, just quiet, like she doesn't want us to know. Damien's heart broke. I'm sorry. For hurting her. For not being here. Will you hurt her again? I'm going to try very hard not to. Amelie studied him with those ancient eyes that seemed too knowing for a 5-year-old. Trying isn't the same as doing. You're right. I won't hurt her again. I promise you. She considered this. Held out her small hand, pinky extended. Pinky promise? Damien linked his pinky with hers, understanding that this was more binding than any business contract he'd ever signed. Pinky promise. Amelie nodded, satisfied. Okay. I'm going to trust that. From that moment, something shifted. Amelie began to talk to him more. Not long conversations, but small observations. Showing him paintings, playing pieces she composed, letting him into her world in increments. 6 weeks after the engagement party, Damien received a call from his parents. He'd been avoiding them, knowing the conversation would be difficult. Damien, his mother said when he finally answered, we need to talk about these children. What about them? Are they really yours? Your father and I have been beside ourselves. 3 grandchildren we never knew about? They're really mine, Damien confirmed. And before you ask, yes, I should have known. Yes, I'm an idiot. Yes, I'm trying to fix it. A pause. Then his mother's voice, softer. We'd like to meet them. Damien hesitated. His parents weren't warm people. They'd raised him with the same emotional distance his grandfather had modeled. Affection was weakness. Love was a luxury. Success was everything. I'll have to ask Vivian. Vivian, his father's voice came on the line, speakerphone clearly. Is that the children's mother? Yes. The one you divorced? Yes. And never mentioned was pregnant? I didn't know, Damien said tightly. How could you not know your own wife was pregnant? Because I wasn't paying attention, Damien snapped. Because I was too busy building the empire you and grandfather always said was more important than anything else. Because I learned from the best how to prioritize work over family. Silence on the other end. Then his mother again, quiet. We'd still like to meet our grandchildren, if you'll allow it. Damien talked to Vivian that evening. She listened to his halting explanation of his parents, his complicated relationship with them, his worry that they'd be cold or distant with the children. Let them meet, Vivian said finally. The children should know their grandparents. And Damien, people can surprise you. Your parents might rise to the occasion. She was right. Damien watched in shock as his father, the man who'd never shown him physical affection, got down on the floor to play with the triplets. As his mother, who'd never seemed interested in children, listened with genuine attention to Julian's explanation of calculus. They stayed for 3 hours. When they left, his mother hugged him. Actually hugged him. They're wonderful, she whispered. Don't mess this up. I won't. We did, mess up with you. Your father and I, we were so focused on legacy and empire that we forgot about this. She gestured back toward the suite where the children's laughter could still be heard. We're so sorry. Damien felt something in his chest crack open. A wound he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. After that, his parents visited regularly, took the children on outings, spoiled them outrageously, became the grandparents Damien had never imagined they could be. People can change, Vivian told him one evening, watching his father teach Julian chess, if they want it badly enough. 3 months after the engagement party that had upended his world, Damien's phone rang at 11 p.m. Vivian's name on the screen. She never called this late. He answered immediately. Vivian? What's wrong? Her voice was shaking, all professional composure gone. Julian collapsed. Severe abdominal pain. We're at Manhattan Presbyterian. They're running tests. I'm coming, Damien said, already moving. Which floor? Pediatric emergency. Fourth floor. But Damien, you don't have to. There's a nanny here with the girls, and I can handle. I'm coming, he repeated. I'm already in the car. He made it to the hospital in 12 minutes, probably breaking several traffic laws. Found Vivian in the waiting room, still in the clothes she'd been wearing to some evening event. A gown and heels and perfect makeup that was now streaked from crying. She looked up when he entered, and the relief in her eyes hit him like a physical force. What do we know? He asked, sitting beside her. They think it's his appendix. They're doing scans now. If it is, he'll need surgery. Tonight. She was trembling. He's so little, Damien. He's 5 years old, and he's terrified, and I can't fix this. Damien took her hand. Where are the girls? Waiting room B. My nanny has them, but they're scared too. I'll get them. We should all be together. He found Celeste and Amelie in a smaller waiting room down the hall. Both girls had been crying. The nanny looked exhausted and worried. Papa, Celeste launched herself at him. Is Julian going to be okay? Damien caught her, held her tight. The doctors are taking good care of him. Let's go be with your mother, okay? Both of you? Amelie asked quietly. Both of us, Damien confirmed. He thanked the nanny, sent her home, then gathered both girls and brought them to Vivian. They curled up on either side of her, and the four of them waited. 20 minutes later, a doctor emerged. The Vermonroe family? Here, Vivian said, standing. It's acute appendicitis. The appendix is inflamed and could rupture soon. We need to operate immediately. Vivian swayed slightly. Damien steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Can we see him before? Damien asked. He asked for both his parents. The doctor looked between them, clearly noting the resemblance in the two girls standing there. Both of you can come back. Briefly, they followed the doctor to a pre-op room. Julian lay on a bed that seemed far too large for his small body, wearing a hospital gown covered in cartoon characters. He looked pale and scared and so very young. Hey, buddy, Damien said, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his throat. They're going to fix you up. Papa, Julian's voice was small. You came. Of course I came. What about your meeting? You said you had something important tonight. The fact that his 5-year-old son was worried about his schedule while facing surgery nearly destroyed Damien. He sat on the edge of the bed, took Julian's hand gently. You are my only important meeting, he said fiercely. Today, tomorrow, forever. There is nothing in this world more important than being right here with you. Julian's eyes filled with tears. I'm scared. I know. But Maman and I are going to be right here the whole time. When you wake up, we'll both be here. Promise? I promise. Vivian leaned down, kissed Julian's forehead. You're the bravest boy I know. This will be over before you know it. A nurse appeared. We need to take him now. Damien and Vivian stood back, watching as their son was wheeled away. The moment the doors closed behind him, Vivian's knees buckled. Damien caught her, held her as she finally let herself break. She cried against his chest, 6 years of doing everything alone finally overwhelming her. He's going to be okay, Damien murmured into her hair. He's strong, like his mother. I'm not strong, Vivian sobbed. I'm terrified. You're the strongest person I know. You raised 3 children alone, built an empire. You're extraordinary. I'm so tired, she whispered. So tired of doing everything alone. You're not alone anymore, Damien said. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. They returned to the waiting room where Celeste and Amelie had fallen asleep on adjacent chairs. Damien carefully moved them so they could lie down properly, covered them with his jacket. Then he and Vivian sat side by side in uncomfortable plastic chairs and waited. 1 hour became 2. 2 became 3. At 2:30 in the morning, Vivian's head dropped onto Damien's shoulder. She was asleep within seconds, exhausted from worry and emotion. Damien sat motionless, afraid to wake her. He studied her face in the harsh fluorescent light. The face he'd loved 6 years ago. Still loved, if he was being honest. Would always love. He'd been such a fool. He did everything that mattered, and he'd thrown it away for what? Hotels? Money? A legacy? What legacy mattered if you had no one to share it with? At 3:15 a.m., the surgeon emerged, still in scrubs. The family stirred. Vivian jerked awake. Celeste, and Amelie sat up, rubbing their eyes. The surgery went perfectly, the doctor said with a tired smile. We removed the appendix before it ruptured. He's in recovery now. Should wake up in about 30 minutes. He's okay? Vivian asked, her voice breaking. He's really okay? He's really okay. You can see him in a few minutes. Vivian started crying again, but this time from relief. Damien pulled her close, let her soak his shirt with grateful tears while both girls hugged them from either side. When they were allowed into recovery, Julian was still groggy from anesthesia, but awake. His eyes found them immediately. Papa? You stayed. Of course I stayed. Even though it's late and you have work? I don't care about work. You're what matters. You and your sisters and your mother. Julian smiled sleepily. Will you always stay now? The question revealed so much. This child's understanding that adults left. That presence was conditional. That you had to be worth someone's time. Damien's heart shattered. Especially then, he whispered, taking Julian's small hand in his. The boring moments are the ones I want most. Breakfast before school. Homework help. Regular Tuesday nights. Those are the moments I missed. The ones I want back. That sounds nice, Julian murmured, his eyes drifting closed again. I'm glad, man. Let us meet you. Me too, buddy. Me too. They stayed at the hospital through the night. Damien sent his parents to the suite to pack overnight bags and bring fresh clothes. By dawn, when Julian was moved to a regular room, the whole family was there. Grandparents and parents and siblings, all gathered around one hospital bed. Julian slept peacefully. Vivian dozed in a chair beside him. Celeste and Amelie had claimed the small couch, curled together like puppies. Damien stood at the window, watching the sun rise over Manhattan. His phone had been vibrating all night. Board meeting in Tokyo. Singapore crisis. Investor calls. He turned off his phone. His father approached quietly. Everything okay? With the business? I don't know, Damien admitted. I haven't checked. His father looked shocked. You haven't, but there are deals pending. Decisions that need. They can wait. Or other people can make them. Damien gestured to his family. This is what matters. His father followed his gaze. Looked at Vivian sleeping in an uncomfortable chair because she refused to leave her son. At 3 children who'd been strangers 4 months ago and were now Damien's entire world. Yes, his father said softly. I'm starting to understand that. Over the next few days, as Julian recovered in the hospital, Damien barely left. He worked from a room when he had to, laptop balanced on his knees, conducting video meetings in hushed tones. But mostly he just was present. He learned that Celeste got anxious when she couldn't move around, so he took her on walks through the hospital corridors. That Amelie processed fear through art, so he bought her a sketch pad and she filled it with images of her brother recovering. He learned that Vivian hadn't slept more than 3 hours straight in 5 years, that she'd been operating on adrenaline and coffee and sheer determination, that letting someone else carry part of the load felt foreign to her, uncomfortable, but also desperately needed. On the 3rd day, when Julian was cleared to go home, Damien helped pack up the hospital room. Vivian stood by the window, watching the city below. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For being here. For staying. She paused. For proving me wrong. About what? About whether you could change. Damien moved to stand beside her. I told you I would. People say a lot of things. Vivian turned to face him. You showed me. That matters. I want to keep showing you. Not just for the kids. For you too. Damien. I know, he said quickly. I know this isn't about us. I know I hurt you too badly for things to just go back to how they were. But Vivian, I never stopped loving you. And I'm not asking you to love me back or forgive me or anything. I just need you to know. She looked at him for a long moment. I don't know what to do with that, she admitted. 6 years ago, I would have given anything to hear you say it. Now I'm scared. Of getting hurt again. Of letting the children get hurt. I understand. So let me keep proving it. Let me keep showing up. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. Ask me in a year, Vivian said. After you've proven this version of you is real and lasting. Not just crisis management. Consistent, boring, everyday showing up. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't no either. And for now, that was enough. If you're still with me on this journey, drop a comment below. Tell me what you think. Can people truly change, or is Damien's transformation too little, too late? Because the next 6 months are going to test everything he's built, every promise he's made, and whether love can survive 6 years of absence and pain. Keep watching to see how this story unfolds. 6 months after the engagement party that had destroyed his old life and given him a new one, Damien walked into the glass and steel building that housed Monroe Architectural Innovations. The company Vivian had built from nothing while raising 3 children alone. The lobby was stunning. Sustainable materials mixed with cutting-edge design. Natural light flooding through precisely angled windows. Every detail intentional, beautiful, functional. Just like Vivian. A receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" "Damien Rousseau. I'm here for Ms. Monroe's anniversary celebration." The woman's eyes widened slightly in recognition. Of course. 15th floor. The gallery space. Damien rode the elevator up, his heart pounding. He dropped the children at his parents' house an hour ago. They'd been excited about a sleepover with grandparents who spoiled them shamelessly. Tonight was just him and Vivian. The first time they'd been alone together for more than a few minutes since the divorce 6 years ago. The elevator doors opened to reveal a transformed floor. What was usually office space had been converted into a gallery. Display cases held architectural models. Walls featured renderings and photographs of completed projects. Each piece labeled with location and impact. Vivian stood at the far end of the room, talking with a group of investors. She wore emerald green, and the color made her eyes luminous. Her hair was up, exposing the curve of her neck. She was laughing at something someone said, confident and powerful, and so beautiful it hurt to look at her. She glanced up, saw him. Something shifted in her expression. She excused herself from the group and moved toward him. "You came," she said. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I wasn't sure. I know you have that conference call with Singapore tonight. I rescheduled it. This is more important." A small smile touched her lips. "The children are settled, thoroughly spoiled, and probably eating ice cream for dinner despite my explicit instructions to my mother about healthy meals." Vivian laughed. "Your parents have changed so much. People can," Damien said quietly, "if they want it badly enough." She held his gaze for a moment. "Come on. Let me show you what we've built." They moved through the exhibition together. She explained each project with obvious pride. The Brisbane Tower that housed 3,000 families, 40% in affordable units. The Singapore complex with its revolutionary, sustainable systems. The Dubai Museum that was redefining green architecture. "You've changed skylines," Damien said, genuinely awed. "I've built spaces where people live their lives," Vivian corrected. "There's a difference. This isn't about ego or legacy. It's about impact, making the world marginally better through thoughtful design." He studied her. "When did you become so wise?" "When I had 3 tiny humans depending on me and no one else to rely on." Wisdom was survival. They stopped before a massive model. A mixed-use development that combined residential, commercial, and green space in ways Damien had never seen. "This is beautiful," he said, "and ambitious." "It's necessary," Vivian replied. "Wealth means nothing if we don't use it to make the world better. What's the point of having $7 billion if people are homeless? If cities are choking on pollution? If the next generation inherits our mistakes?" Damien looked at her, this magnificent woman who'd transformed pain into power, obstacles into opportunities. "I was a fool," he said quietly. 6 years ago. To let you go. To think my empire mattered more than you did." "Yes," Vivian agreed simply. "You were. And now?" She turned to face him fully. "Now you're a father who shows up, who rearranges board meetings for piano recitals, who learns about chess and martial arts and musical composition because your children love those things, who sat in a hospital for 3 days because Julian needed you. You're different, because you showed me what actually matters." "No," she corrected gently, "because you finally chose to see it. I didn't change you, Damien. You changed yourself." Before he could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. His parents burst through the doors, looking sheepish, followed by 3 children who were supposed to be at a sleepover. "They insisted on surprising you," his mother explained apologetically. But Vivian was smiling as three small bodies collided with her in enthusiastic hugs. Man, Amelie exclaimed. We made you something. The children presented a large card they'd clearly created that afternoon, covered in artwork and handprints, with careful lettering inside. Julian had written the words, each letter precise. Thank you for being the best mama in the world. We love you to the stars and back. Vivian's eyes glistened as she read it. Oh, my loves, this is perfect. Papa helped with the planning, Celeste announced proudly. Damien felt something shift in his chest as Vivian looked at him, not with suspicion or guardedness anymore, with genuine warmth, with something that looked almost like. He didn't let himself hope. After the celebration, after the guests had left and the children were playing in a corner office that had been set up with toys, Vivian found Damien standing before a rendering he'd been studying for several minutes. See something interesting? She asked. This project, he gestured to the luxury hotel design. It's different from your usual work. More personal somehow. Vivian smiled slightly. That's because it was designed for someone specific. A hotel where families could stay together, but each person could have their own space, where connection and independence could coexist. It's beautiful. Damien read the label. The Grandison property, that historic building on Fifth Avenue. I acquired it last month, Vivian said. I'm going to transform it into something new while honoring its history. Spaces that have stories but are ready for new chapters. The metaphor wasn't lost on him. Vivian, I'm not saying I'm ready, she interrupted gently. But I'm saying I see you trying. I see you showing up, being patient, putting them first. She paused. Maybe someday that will be enough to build something new. Not what we had before. That's gone. But something different. Something better. Damien's heart was pounding. I would wait forever for that someday. Don't be dramatic, she said, but she was smiling. Just keep being the father they deserve. Keep being consistent, present, real. The rest, we'll see. It wasn't a promise, but it was possibility. And for the first time in 6 years, Damien felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Hope. 1 year after the engagement party that had shattered his world, Damien stood in the grand ballroom of the newly reopened Grandison Hotel. The same room where his life had imploded was now transformed. Vivian's vision brought to life in sustainable materials and revolutionary design. The space honored the building's history while creating something entirely new. Original crown molding preserved. Modern skylights added. Every detail a conversation between past and future. Architectural magazines were calling it a masterpiece. The restoration of the year. A building that proved you could honor tradition while embracing innovation. The ribbon-cutting ceremony had been perfect. The triplets, now 7 years old, had cut the ribbon with oversized scissors, hamming for the cameras. Julian had given a small speech about sustainable architecture that made the assembled crowd laugh and applaud. Celeste had demonstrated her martial arts skills in the new fitness center. Amelie had played an original composition on the lobby's grand piano. They were confident, articulate, utterly charming. Everything Vivian had raised them to be. But Damien's favorite moment came later. After the crowds had dispersed and the children had been picked up by their grandparents for another spoiling session. When it was just him and Vivian, alone in the private residence she'd designed on the top floor. This space wasn't for guests. It was for family. Connected suites, so children could have their own rooms. Shared living areas for togetherness. A kitchen designed for cooking together. Balconies overlooking the city. A home in the sky. Vivian stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching Manhattan glitter below. Damien came up behind her, not touching but close. Having second thoughts about the partnership? They made it official 6 months ago. Equal partners in the Grandison venture. His investment, her vision, shared ownership. Not his money rescuing her. Not her talent dependent on his resources. True partnership. About the hotel? Never. It's perfect. And the other partnership? He was asking about the careful, slow rebuilding of trust between them. The dinners that had become date nights. The stolen kisses when the children were with grandparents. The way she'd started looking at him again with something that might become love. Or might already be love, just waiting to be acknowledged. Vivian turned to face him. Ask me. What? Ask me what you've been wanting to ask for 6 months. Damien's breath caught. He'd been carrying the ring in his pocket every day for the past 3 months, waiting for the right moment, terrified of pushing too hard, too fast, of asking for more than she was ready to give. But looking at her now, in the home she designed for their family, he knew the moment had come. He pulled out the small box, opened it to reveal the ring. Not ostentatious, not the massive diamond he'd given her the first time because he'd thought bigger was better. Just perfect, a single stone that caught the light like a captured star. Vivian Monroe, he said, and his voice was steady despite his hammering heart. I loved you 6 years ago, but I was too broken to choose you, too focused on empire to see what actually mattered. You gave me 3 perfect children I didn't deserve and a second chance I'll spend my life earning. He met her eyes. Will you marry me? Again? For real this time? Not a strategic alliance or a convenient partnership. Just us, building a life together. If you'll have me. She looked at the ring. At him. At the life they'd carefully, painfully rebuilt over the past year. Yes, she whispered. Damien's knees almost buckled. Yes. But Damien. Her voice was firm now. If you ever choose your empire over our family again. I won't, he interrupted fiercely. You're my empire. You and Julian and Celeste and Amelie. Everything else is just buildings. She kissed him then, soft and promising and full of the future they were brave enough to build together. From the doorway, 3 small voices erupted in perfect unison. You. They're kissing again. Damien and Vivian broke apart, laughing as their children tumbled into the room. Apparently the sleepover had been cut short, so they could be here for this moment. Damien's parents stood in the hallway, looking entirely unrepentant about ruining the plan. Does this mean Papa is moving in? Julian asked, his analytical mind already processing logistics. If that's okay with you 3, Vivian replied. Yes, Celeste pumped her fist in the air. Now we can have family game night every night. Not every night, Damien laughed. Some nights Papa and Maman need alone time. Amelie approached quietly, studying the ring on her mother's finger. It's beautiful, Maman. Like you. Like all of us, Vivian corrected, pulling all 3 children into a hug and reaching out to include Damien. Like our whole beautiful, complicated, perfect family. Standing in a home Vivian had designed, surrounded by the people who made his life complete, Damien finally understood what wealth really meant. Not the billions in his accounts. Not the empire bearing his name. Not the hotels on 5 continents or the boardrooms where his word was law. This, the family he'd almost lost. The love he'd nearly thrown away. The second chance he'd been given to get it right. He'd been a billionaire before he'd known about his children. But standing here, wearing his future wife's yes like armor and his children's laughter like a crown, Damien understood he'd been bankrupt in every way that mattered. Now, finally he was truly rich. 3 months later, they were married again. Not a massive society wedding like the first time. Just family and close friends on the roof garden of the Grandison Hotel. The children served as the entire wedding party. Julian was ring bearer, carrying the bands with solemn importance. Celeste and Amelie were flower girls, though Celeste had negotiated to also demonstrate a martial arts form during the reception. Damien's vows were simple. I promised to show up every day for breakfast chaos and homeware battles and piano recitals, for the boring Tuesday nights and the extraordinary Sundays. For all of it, you are my home. You 4 are my empire. Everything else is just details. Vivian's vows made him cry. I promise to let you carry part of the load I've been carrying alone, to build this life together instead of side by side, to trust that you'll stay, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. When they kissed, 3 small voices cheered, no longer grossed out by parental affection, but celebrating it. The reception was intimate and perfect. Damien danced with Vivian, with each of his daughters, taught Julian how to do a proper ballroom waltz. His parents, transformed from the cold figures of his childhood into doting grandparents, held court at a corner table, showing off photos of the triplets to anyone who would look. Near the end of the evening, as the sun set over Manhattan, Damien found himself on the balcony with his father. "I'm proud of you," his father said quietly. "Not for the empire. For this. For choosing what matters." "You taught me that," Damien replied. "Eventually, by example of what not to do, and then by changing, showing me it was possible." His father smiled sadly. "I wasted a lot of years with you, thinking legacy meant buildings and money. I'm trying not to waste what time I have left with my grandchildren. That's all any of us can do. Choose differently going forward." Inside, through the glass doors, Vivian was dancing with all three children at once, laughing as they spun her in circles. "She's remarkable," Damien's father observed. "She is. Don't mess it up this time." "I won't." As the evening wound down and the children began to yawn, the family gathered for one last moment before heading to their new home. The penthouse residence at the Grandison, designed for them, built for them, waiting to be filled with memories. Vivian held Amelie, who'd fallen asleep on her shoulder. Damien carried Julian, who was trying valiantly to stay awake but losing the battle. Celeste walked between them, holding both their hands, still energized despite the late hour. "This is nice," she announced. "Having two parents. I think we should keep Papa." "I think we should too," Vivian agreed, smiling at Damien over the children's heads. In the car riding home, with three children safely buckled in the back and Vivian's hand in his, Damien felt peace settle over him like a blessing. His phone buzzed. Patricia, probably with some urgent matter that needed his attention. He turned the phone off without looking. Everything that mattered was right here. In this car. This family. This life they were building together, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. So let me ask you, has this story moved you? Do you believe in second chances? In transformation? In the possibility that we can choose differently, do better, become the person we wish we'd been all along? Damien Rousseau would tell you it's possible, but only if you're willing to do the work. Only if you're willing to show up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Only if you choose love over empire, presence over power, family over everything else that the world says matters. If this story touched you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Love Tales by Mr. Grayson for more stories about redemption, second chances, and the transformative power of choosing what truly matters. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you do if your past walked through the door with three children you never knew existed? Would you run toward it or away from it? Would you have the courage to choose differently? Thank you for watching this journey with me. Thank you for believing in the possibility of change. Thank you for understanding that the greatest wealth isn't measured in billions, but in the people who make our lives worth living. Until next time, remember that it's never too late to choose love. Never too late to show up. Never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. This is Love Tales by Mr. Grayson. See you in the next story.